Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. A quick preview and I guess prediction for Bakhram Murtazaliev versus Tszyu. This fight goes down this weekend, takes place in America, and Tszyu is fighting for the IBF title that is held by Bakhram Murtazaliev. A relatively interesting fight, in my opinion, and credit to Tszyu, a pretty tough fight to come back to following his defeat to Sebastian Fundora. Of course, he lost on points to Fundora after receiving a horrific cut, and took a bit of damage in that fight, I would say. But regardless, he showed great heart in that fight. The circumstances of his loss were a little unfortunate. You know, just a terrible cut. I think it was caused by an elbow, I believe, or a shoulder, I forget. But he continued to fight. He could have actually pulled out and got a no contest, but his team and him decided to continue, and it was what it was, man. He was losing so much blood, he couldn't really get a foothold in the fight after that, but, showed great heart, showed great willingness, but ultimately came up short due to the circumstances, and it was a rough fight. So coming into a fight like this, I think, from Tszyu, has to be commended. Now, Bakhram Murtazaliev, I'm not saying he's like the next big thing or anything like that, but he's a solid fighter. Decent amateur pedigree over in Russia. Physically, he's a strong guy, seems to carry a bit of power, relatively big for the weight class. He's 6 foot, whereas, Tszyu's only 5'8.5". Murtazaliev is a bigger dude. He is the bigger guy. So he's physically strong, he's relatively well schooled, he's got a bit of pop. He can be a little unorthodox at times, and he does have the habit of losing his shape, in my opinion. We saw that in the fight with Jack Kolkai, where he won his world title. In that fight, he was getting beat, in my opinion, until he turned it around and eventually stopped Jack Kolkai in the 11th round. Jack Kolkai was kind of old manning him in there, but the strength, the size, the power, the freshness, and the risk-taking of Murtazaliev proved to be a bit too much for the veteran Jack Kolkai. But in that fight, he showed what he's good at, in terms of power, in terms of strength, in terms of toughness, in terms of being a gunslinger. But I kind of felt he showed his vulnerabilities in that fight. Tszyu is the much more measured fighter of the two. He likes to measure you up with the jab. He likes to look for the right-hand counter. He's a boxer puncher / counter puncher, I would say, Tszyu, though he has shown a willingness to fight as well. Carries decent power in both his left hand and right hand. Decent hook, decent uppercut. Got a good tendency to... He's got a good finishing instinct, I should say, when he has a guy hurt. Doesn't smother his work. He's got a good understanding of distance. Tszyu's one of those guys that does the basics really, really well, combining that with solid power, solid timing. He's a well-schooled fighter, Tszyu, and the matchmaking in his career in the last couple of years has been really good. He's been tested, he's had his rough moments, and he's proved that, in my opinion, he is a genuine sort of top 5 super welterweight. Murtazaliev, on the other hand, he's got the win over Kolkai. Aside from that, though, he's really been feasting on low-level competition, to say the least. And he's stopped most of those guys. But, we still don't really know how good Murtazaliev is at the elite level. As I said, an ancient Jack Kolkai is his best win, and in that fight he kind of struggled. That's not to say he can't raise the levels. Maybe he will do in this sort of big fight atmosphere. One thing I'll say about Murtazaliev, when I watch the guy fight, he's one of those guys that He shows moments of real quality, so he's got that kind of ability to lead with his straight right hand, similar to how Kovalev did. He kind of throws that hip feint, and he can then lead off that feint with a straight right hand. He's also got a pretty good pull counter right hand as well, where he'll lean back, draw the lead, and fire down the middle with his straight right hand. I actually think he's a pretty good counter puncher, but primarily, he kind of relies on his size. He tries to wear you down. He tries to put his punches together. He tries to work the body with hooks to the body, hooks to the head, and he'll try and run you over. And in the in the process of trying to run you over, he can then mix that in with things, with counter-punching, if you're trying to fire back against him. That's where I think Murataliev is most dangerous, is if Tszyu holds his feet and tries to exchange. Because that's one thing I've noticed about Murataliev. If there is one bit of quality there, I think it's his ability to fire with his opponents. Especially with the right hand, but also with the left hook. When he's being purely aggressive, I think he loses his shape way too much, to be honest with you. He kind of leans over his front foot, squares up, he gets wild with his hooks. You know, he really does blow a gasket when he tries to apply that pressure, and he is a little reckless with it, I'd say. Again, I've seen a good jab from Murataliev, but he's one of those guys that he doesn't seem to use it consistently, and it's like the counter-punching. What he does best, I don't think he does it anywhere near enough. That's for counter-punching, that's for solid jab, that's for straight punches as well. I don't think he does that enough. He really does rely on that pressure, and I think it makes him open and vulnerable. And we saw Kolkai pick him off. Kolkai with that high guard, that kind of basic pressure wasn't getting through for a while against Kolkai. Eventually it did, but when it wasn't working, Kolkai was outworking him, outboxing him. But Kolkai can't punch, and he was still able to rock Murataliev a little bit. So against a guy in Tszyu who can measure you up, who can take that half step back, who can fire the straight right or the uppercut through the middle, or even hook around the side, I think Murataliev, given what he's shown us so far, is going to be open for these counter-punch opportunities. And from what I've seen in his career, he can be hurt. And he's, like I said, he's going to be open for these shots. I think Murataliev will ask questions. I think he'll have moments kind of similar to Brian Mendoza. You know, where Mendoza was getting outboxed, he was getting countered, he was getting hurt, but he was still having his moments. I think it's going to be a fight similar to that. I think it's going to be similar to the fight Tszyu had with Brian Mendoza. However, I think the difference is, I do think Murataliev will eventually walk into something that hurts him or completely knocks him out. And I've got Tszyu by stoppage. I think stylistically, it favours Tszyu, but at the same time, I still think Murataliev has the ability, the strength, the size, and quality to a degree to give Tszyu trouble. I've got it being a competitive fight early on, until maybe Tszyu starts to really counter, starts to really take advantage of the openings, and I think you'll start to see him break down Bakhram Murtazaliev. But yeah, it's a decent fight, it's a good fight to come back to, you know, it's not a gimme fight. It's not a gimme fight, so yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, and stylistically it should be a fun fight as well. Another thing to consider as well, I'm kind of expecting Tszyu to come out with a chip on his shoulder after the Fundora fight. I think given the circumstances, he must be feeling hard done by, and I think he'll go in there and try to remind people what he's about. But having said that, you know, Murataliev may get the extra 10% being a world champion. Sometimes that happens when a guy becomes a world champion. They get that extra 5 or 10% better kind of thing because they have the confidence. But yeah, I've got Tszyu by stoppage late, but I think Murataliev will give it a good go. I think he'll win a couple of rounds. I think he'll land. I think he'll give Tszyu trouble, but I think Tszyu's countering will be the difference here, and power. Anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.